The panel was supposed to be a calm discussion on policy, but it took a sharp turn the moment Stephen Miller leaned forward, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. With a raised tone and unrelenting intensity, he declared that Jasmine Crockett was nothing more than a product of what he called the radical left's obsession with chaos. His words were delivered with venom, each sentence louder than the last, as if sheer volume could replace reason. "Congresswoman Crockett," Miller thundered, "you are not here to speak for the people. You are here to tear down the very fabric of America. You stand for disorder, for division, and for the collapse of everything this nation was built upon." The audience stirred. Some gasped. Others leaned in closer, sensing that something explosive was unfolding before their eyes. Commentators watching live were already firing off messages to their networks, knowing they had just captured the soundbite that would dominate headlines. Miller did not stop. He slammed his hand against the table, insisting that Crockett's voice was nothing but noise manufactured to silence true patriots. His face grew red, his words quicker, his accusations wilder. "You defend criminals, you attack law enforcement, and you disgrace this country with every word you utter." It was an ambush, a verbal assault designed to rattle, to destabilize, to leave Crockett flustered. Yet as the camera zoomed in on her, the contrast was striking. While Miller burned with fury, Crockett sat composed, her eyes fixed on him, calm and unwavering. The silence between his words and her lack of immediate reaction only heightened the tension. It felt like a storm building towards something inevitable, a moment when fury would meet composure, and only one could emerge intact. The panel had been convened under the banner of a national broadcast titled "The State of American Leadership." It was meant to be a broad conversation featuring perspectives from across the spectrum. On one side sat Stephen Miller, former senior advisor in the Trump administration, notorious for his fiery rhetoric and uncompromising positions. On the other side was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, rising star in the Democratic Party, celebrated for her sharp intellect and ability to dismantle her opponents with precision. The network hosting the event had deliberately crafted this lineup to generate sparks, pairing Miller's hardline conservatism against Crockett's unapologetic progressivism. Other panelists included 2 seasoned journalists and a retired judge, but from the very first moments, it was clear that the spotlight would belong to Miller and Crockett. The moderator attempted to maintain order, opening the evening with questions on national security, the economy, and public trust in government. Yet the exchange never strayed far from personal confrontation. Miller used every topic as a springboard for accusations, weaving in attacks that targeted Crockett directly. He painted her as the embodiment of what he called the radical decay of Washington. The atmosphere inside the studio grew heavier with each exchange. Viewers watching at home began flooding social media with clips and commentary. Hashtags linking both Miller and Crockett trended within minutes, with thousands debating who would prevail in the inevitable clash. For Crockett, this was not the first time she faced hostility on national television. She had built her reputation on walking into hostile rooms and leaving with her opponents exposed. For Miller, this was an opportunity to reassert relevance in a political landscape where his influence had been fading. The collision was not just between 2 individuals. It was between 2 visions of America, 2 narratives colliding in real time before millions. Each word, each interruption, each pause carried stakes that reached far beyond the walls of that studio. Stephen Miller leaned even further into his attack, his voice tightening with a mix of rage and desperation. He accused Jasmine Crockett of manipulating facts, of twisting every conversation into a victim narrative, and of pushing policies he claimed would destroy the moral foundation of the nation. Each sentence dripped with contempt, and the moderator's attempts to intervene were drowned out by Miller's relentless cadence. "You stand here pretending to care about the American people," he snapped, pointing a finger across the table, "but your record shows nothing but betrayal. You undermine law enforcement, you defend the indefensible, and you spread division every time you open your mouth." The panel was no longer a debate. It was an onslaught. The journalist tried to interject. The retired judge raised his hand to speak, but Miller refused to yield. He talked over everyone, escalating further. Tell us, Congresswoman, why do you side with criminals over citizens? Why do you cheer for failure? Why do you disgrace the very oath you swore? The tension in the room was unbearable. Viewers online described it as a verbal battering ram. Social media feeds lit up with reactions, some cheering Miller's aggression, others recoiling at the spectacle of raw hostility. But through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained still, her posture steady, her face calm, her eyes locked on Miller with an expression that betrayed neither fear nor anger. She let him continue, let the waves of accusations crash against her like a storm battering against a cliff. Miller mistook her composure for weakness. He raised his voice higher, nearly shouting, pounding his words like weapons. Your silence tells us everything. You can't defend your record because there is nothing to defend. You are an embarrassment to Congress and a disgrace to this country. The studio grew tense with anticipation. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. The journalists fell silent, realizing that a breaking point was near. And in that silence, it became clear. Miller had thrown everything he had. The storm was peaking. What no one expected was how quickly it would all unravel. When Miller finally paused to catch his breath, the room seemed to freeze. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine Crockett, waiting for an eruption, a fiery counterattack to match his rage. But instead, she leaned slightly forward, her voice low and measured, carrying a calm that cut deeper than any scream. Stephen, she began, her tone almost surgical. You just spent the last 10 minutes proving exactly why Americans are losing faith in this style of politics. Loud words, empty accusations, and not a single solution. The audience shifted, the silence heavy. Miller blinked, caught off guard by the steadiness of her delivery. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't flinch. Every syllable landed with the weight of control. You accuse me of standing with criminals, she continued. But what you really stand for is fear. Fear of change, fear of accountability, fear of a country that no longer bows to the politics of division. You shout because you cannot persuade. You attack because you cannot defend. The retired judge nodded subtly, while one of the journalists leaned back in her chair, whispering, She's dismantling him. Crockett didn't stop. You claim my silence proves weakness. No, Stephen. My silence proves discipline. Because unlike you, I don't confuse chaos with strength. And unlike you, I don't mistake volume for truth. The words struck like a hammer. Miller opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The moment lingered. His fury had met her composure, and the contrast was devastating. Social media exploded instantly. Clips of Crockett's calm response were shared at lightning speed, captions declaring her words a masterclass in restraint. Within minutes, hashtags like #CrockettBreaks. Miller began trending. On the panel, the moderator gave a faint nod, sensing the balance had shifted entirely. The room was no longer Miller's battleground. It belonged to Crockett. Stephen Miller sat back, visibly shaken, his earlier confidence drained away. He shuffled his notes, searching for words, but the silence around him was crushing. Jasmine Crockett, however, leaned forward once more, her voice steady, her cadence deliberate. This country is tired, she said, turning not just to Miller, but to the cameras and the millions watching at home. Tired of being told that screaming is leadership. Tired of being told that insults are solutions. Tired of being told that anger is the only language politics can speak. Her words carried across the studio like a wave. The other panelists remained silent, recognizing that this was no longer just a rebuttal. It was a statement of principle. America deserves better, she continued. We deserve leaders who don't mistake cruelty for strength. We deserve leaders who know the difference between service and spectacle. And we deserve to debate our future without tearing down the very people who fight to make it brighter. A quiet murmur spread through the audience, followed by scattered applause that quickly grew louder. Online, the clip of Miller's collapse and Crockett's calm dismantling began to dominate feeds. Commentators called it a turning point, analysts described it as a defining moment in political television, and ordinary viewers flooded timelines with praise for her composure. Miller tried once more to interrupt, but his voice cracked, his attempt swallowed by the momentum Crockett had seized. She turned back to him with a final line that ended the exchange. You wanted a fight, Stephen, but what you got was the truth, and the truth doesn't need to shout. The panel sat in a stunned silence. The moderator cleared his throat, struggling to regain control of the broadcast. But it was too late. The moment had already been etched into the memory of everyone watching. As the broadcast ended, headlines were already writing themselves. Miller meltdown, Crockett's calm breaks the storm, the Night Fury met discipline. What was meant to be just another panel discussion had become a political spectacle, one destined to be replayed, dissected, and remembered for years to come. For Stephen Miller, it was a collapse. For Jasmine Crockett, it was a triumph. And for America, it was a reminder that in the clash between noise and reason, calm can be the most devastating weapon of all.